kick things off. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another one of Startup Canada's Women Entrepreneur webinars. As many of you know who have been participating over the last couple of weeks, we've been bringing in subject matter experts across Canada talking about some of the challenges that women entrepreneurs specifically are facing under COVID-19 and trying to offer some practical solutions and tips to help us navigate over the next couple of months. We are recording all of these sessions, so we are bringing in live Q&As, so you're welcome to ask questions using the chat function on the very bottom of the screen where it says Q&A. But we will be recording these sessions and promoting them to our entire Women Entrepreneur program. We know that many of our members are feeling a bit of Zoom fatigue at the moment, so we are going to repackage them so that they're accessible at any time. But I think today's conversation is arguably, one of the most important conversations that we should be having about, women entrepreneurs' well-being, about mental health, and really making sure that, under these unparalleled circumstances, that we're all facing, that we are, taking some time to reflect and really put our well-being first. So I'm really delighted to welcome Stephanie Gilbert, PhD and professor at Shannon School of Business at Cape Breton University. Stephanie is going to be talking about a number of different areas, but she holds a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from St. Mary's University and has applied her psychological and health sciences backgrounds to design evidence-based business solutions. So a wonderful fit, I think, for today's conversations. Dr. Gilbert's research and consulting activities really focus on leader motivation, leadership effectiveness, and leadership emergence within groups and teams. She's worked in a number of different industries: nursing, healthcare, nonprofit, and small business startup businesses. So many of our audience members kind of span all of those different sectors. So in this session, Dr. Gilbert will discuss mental health, well-being for women entrepreneurs during times of crisis, but also under normal circumstances. I think this conversation is always important, but even more so now. And she'll present some strategies to protect and promote well-being during this health crisis that might be characterized, by a lot of the challenges that women entrepreneurs specifically are facing: limited childcare, fear, anxieties, limited time. I think many of us are feeling very squeezed in that space, and really having the pressure of still having a business to run at the end of the day. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gilbert to our virtual stage. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jolene. And it's great to be here discussing well-being and mental health for women, because I'm so passionate about women and leadership, and that's really a focus of my research. So we want women in leadership, we want women running businesses, and to support them even in cases where we have this pandemic. So let me share, this is kind of some of the research that we're seeing right now, and some of the data that's coming out from the news. I'm noticing we have many groups that are trying to understand how this pandemic is affecting different groups. And so we're seeing that mental health is an increasing issue. It's being talked about as perhaps the next pandemic after this pandemic of COVID-19 ends. We're seeing a lot of headlines about women, being swept under the carpet, bearing the brunt of this virus, minority women especially being affected disproportionately. We're seeing greater demand for mental health helplines. It's taking a toll on exhausted moms. Mental health has worsened for many Canadians. And I am on a research team as well that's currently looking at how COVID-19 is affecting different groups, particularly employees. And we're seeing some really astounding data coming out. We've asked in one survey questions that assess for PTSD, and we're seeing that the rates where normally we would see prevalence rates of about 2 to 6% of post-traumatic stress disorder, we're seeing rates in Canada just of general employees of about 29.4%. So very high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, similar to what we might see otherwise in first responders. So mental health is a huge issue, and I'm also just analyzing the data that we are getting in now and finding significant differences between men and women on strain, financial strain and psychological strain, where women have much greater strain than men. So all that is to say, this is an important conversation to be having under normal circumstances, but especially now in this pandemic, in terms of how can we protect our mental health and promote our well-being. So I'm going to start with this argument here, which is that, you know, Jolene mentioned that your mental health matters under normal circumstances, but I think it matters even more now. We're all under a tremendous amount of strain, and depending on your circumstances and the nature of your business, how you are affected may differ from how others are affected, but all of us are under a tremendous amount of strain right now. So I think that means that your well-being matters even more than it did before. We need to think of this kind of long-term now, and that we don't know when this pandemic will be over. And so we need to go about it in a sustainable way where we can protect ourselves to get through this in a healthy way. A previous Startup Canada webinar by Linda Babalik that I checked out, she mentioned to be gentle with yourselves, and that's an important message to reiterate. And another webinar, Sylvia Penzak mentioned a study where over 70% of women-owned businesses are impacted emotionally right now, where women are just dealing with this additional strain of doing childcare, homeschool. We still, as women, tend to take on a greater amount of the household duties and childcare in the home, as well as that mental load of caring for your family. So we have this additional strain placed on us. So it's a really important conversation. And I want to present you with some strategies today that can help you to focus on your well-being a bit more. When I talk about psychological health, first I just want to mention what I mean by that. And it's great of late that mental health is more a part of the conversation than it ever has been before. That's really wonderful. But I think that sometimes when we talk about mental health, what we really mean is just the absence of mental illness. And that's not really just all there is to mental health. So there's two continuums here. One is your mental health, and well, of course, you might have no mental illness at all. You could range all the way from minor to very severe mental illness, right? But that's not all that comprises your psychological health. And there's this related but independent dimension of well-being. How happy are you with your life? How satisfied are you? How many positive experiences and emotions do you have on a daily basis? And so this is the other aspect of our psychological health. And where you may perhaps have no mental illness, you can still be quite unhappy with your life and still have quite a lot of negative emotions and experiences relative to positive. And conversely, you can have a severe mental illness, but still have a lot of coping resources available to you so that you can still have happiness in your life and you can still have positive experiences. So all that is to say is that we will fluctuate on these two continuums from a day-to-day basis, sometimes minute to minute, and we can identify overall where we might lie on this mental health continuum and also on this well-being continuum. So kind of think about where are you on these two dimensions? How are you doing right now? Take stock of your degree of well-being and your degree of mental health or mental illness as well. And the idea of this webinar is to try to think about ways to nudge you a little bit more towards the positive end of those two continuums and think about your overall psychological health rather than just mental health or avoiding mental illness. And the other thing I always like to mention about psychological health is that we can think of it like physical health. No, we tend to acknowledge that with physical health, we need to exercise and we need to put time in and we need to be intentional about improving our physical health. And it's the same with our psychological health. We need to invest some time into that, make it a priority, and kind of train ourselves to be more psychologically fit as well. So we have to put in a little bit of time and effort to move ourselves more towards the positive end of these two dimensions. And I'm going to talk about some strategies to do that today. So in that idea of taking stock, think right now about what are your key stressors. So again, this will vary from person to person based on your living situation. I'm home with my 2 kids and, you know, doing homeschool and managing all of that, and my partner's working full-time and I'm working full-time. So for a lot of families, there's going to be a lot of work-life balance issues right now, stress around managing just your household and conflict perhaps in your household. Maybe you're feeling really isolated and lonely if you live alone, or you're dealing with financial strain. For many of us, though, uncertainty will be a major stressor. Not knowing what the future holds feels like a threat to most people. And change as well. So trying to keep up with how things are changing and how health regulations are changing, or some of these government programs that are being announced on a daily basis and being changed all the time. So there's a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty. What is it for you that is a key stressor that you can begin to address? And just take a minute to identify what that might be for you. With that in mind, I'm going to begin by talking about stress and how stress affects you. So right now, a lot of us are feeling a lot of stress, and I want to highlight that stress is really something we've adapted to, we've evolved as humans to have this response to any kind of threat or challenge to our well-being in our environment. And whether it's being chased by a tiger or losing an important client for your business, we tend to react in the exact same way. Our body floods with these hormones that prepare us to react to that threat. We either fight it off, we're ready to fight, or we're ready to escape and flee. And that's really your body trying to protect you. So all I want to say here is that often we think about stress as a bad thing, as something we need to eliminate or totally get rid of. And especially under these circumstances, that's just not going to happen. You're going to have stress, right? We just can't eliminate those stressors. But try to see stress as, instead of just wholly a bad thing, it's some information for you to tell you something that you can now react and respond to. It's your body trying to protect you and trying to prepare you to rise to the challenge of fighting or flighting, whatever that fleeing from, I should say, whatever that threat is to you right now. And if you see this graph here on my slide, it shows research that's been replicated over and over suggests that to a certain extent, stress can be good for us and for our performance. It can prepare us to perform at optimal levels. If you're not stressed enough, you're kind of bored and you might not be motivated to try very hard. And if you're too stressed, that's when performance can begin to decline. So we don't want to totally eliminate stress, but we want to keep it to a manageable level where we can still perform. And what we want to avoid is too much stress for too long, because that's when we're at risk for experiencing burnout. And that's the state of just being totally exhausted, feeling like you can't do anything well, and you really can't perform very well under those circumstances or focus on what it is that you're trying to do. So I want to talk next about how you can protect yourself from that too much stress for too long. And I acknowledge that this is so stressful for everyone. I'm feeling it myself, you know? So I was kind of thinking, preparing this, what do I need to tell myself as well? And the first thing I want to bring up is, you know, think about when you wake up in the middle of, in the first thing in the morning, you have this bucket of resources that you can draw upon, your energy and your willpower, and all the stressors that you encounter throughout the day kind of drain that out of you. You know, you have to kind of spend it like money on the tasks that you're completing throughout the day. And while some tasks, it's very worthwhile expending energy and resources on, other tasks might be an unnecessary drain on your resources. So if you can identify first what could be depleting you right now that you could limit or get rid of. And I have a few suggestions here. One of them might be the information overload, you know, and that's the exposing yourself to the news and to the social media all throughout the day, and to potentially unnecessary negative information that could be really draining you and diverting your attention away from your business and the things that really need your focus and energy. So think about, is there information you could screen out? Could you perhaps set boundaries around social media, or switch off at times? And another thing that really can drain us is trying to do too many things at once. As women, we want to multitask, we want to be efficient, and we're trying to do many things at once. But our brain really isn't wired to be able to do that. Our brain is wired to single task, to do one thing at a time. So where possible, can you avoid the multitasking to just focus on doing one thing well rather than many things not so well? So, you know, your drains could vary, but kind of if you can identify what is the most draining thing on your resources, can you eliminate or reduce that? And the second thing is to conserve your resources. And what I think my main suggestion here is around your expectations. As entrepreneurs, you're ambitious, you're motivated, you have a plan, and your expectations are probably way up here if you're an entrepreneur for yourself, right? Now, under these circumstances, we have a limited capacity to perform in the same way. I'm going to make that assumption about everybody that's watching here, that you have this limited ability to complete those expectations that you might have had before. So to create more realistic expectations about what's reasonable to expect of yourself under these circumstances and with your particular life circumstances right now, that's going to set you up for greater success, and not add the guilt and shame that's associated with not meeting your expectations to your list of stressors. So conserve your resources by trying to create for yourself realistic expectations, what's reasonable for one person to be doing under your circumstances right now. And then the third thing is something I'm going to spend more time on a little bit later, and that's replenish your resources. Take time to recover. This is that idea of self-care that we hear all the time, but you really do need to detach sometimes from your work to replenish, fill your bucket back up, you know, replenish your resources. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. When it comes to managing your psychological health, your physical needs are really important too. And I couldn't talk about psychological health without also addressing physical health because they're so strongly connected. You really need to prioritize your physical needs. There was a Canadian Mental Health Association study in 2019 on entrepreneurs, and they cited fatigue as the #1 stressor faced by entrepreneurs, above everything else across all types of businesses and, you know, revenues and everything else. Sleep was really important. Entrepreneurs have a hard time settling down to sleep, getting to sleep, and getting a good quality sleep. So you need to focus on your amount and quality of sleep. So I'm not a sleep expert, but I do encourage you to think about your routine at bedtime. You know, is there a way that you can relax yourself enough before bed that you can get to sleep more easily, that you can kind of turn off your devices an hour before bed, do something relaxing, so that you're able to get some good sleep. Sleep is critical for your physical and your mental health. Exercise will help you sleep better and also help you in many other ways too, and has been noted as one of the key strategies for entrepreneurs to manage their mental health by a Swedish study that I read. So sleep, nutrition, exercise, hydration, they're all the things we already know we should be doing, but they're also, it's like they provide that double whammy. It's good for your physical and your psychological health. So they're things to really prioritize. So that's your physical needs, but you also have basic psychological needs, right? So there's a lot of research on this, that as humans, there's 3 basic needs that if they are unmet, our well-being is reduced. And you can remember these as the ABCs. So A is for autonomy. And autonomy might be what attracts a lot of people to entrepreneurship because it refers to having choice and flexibility about what it is that you do and how you do it. So So that's wonderful about entrepreneurship. And however, under these circumstances, our autonomy might be limited. We might not be able to do the kinds of things we want to do right now, or even operate our businesses based on this pandemic. So autonomy right now might look like taking control over whatever you can. If that's your limited free time to do something that you love with your family or in your leisure time, meet that need for autonomy by taking control of what you can control and doing what you love when you have the opportunity. Do something that's interesting, something that energizes you. The B in ABCs is for belongingness. And, you know, as humans, we evolved as a social animal. We all have this need to connect with others. And under this pandemic, of course, we're being told to socially distance. But the real term is physical distance. We need to physically distance, but we don't need to disconnect at all from our family and friends and our network. So it's really important to make sure under this pandemic that you're making sure you connect to your network, to support, you know, any support that you can find in the entrepreneurial ecosystem or in your personal network, friends, family. So connect, connect, connect. It's really important to ensure that you feel that you're not alone, that you have social support, and that you belong to a group and to a greater purpose as well, that you make a contribution to society. And remember that you're not alone. We may all be isolated, but we're all going through this together. So belongingness is critical. And the third basic psychological need is, I think, the hardest one for women, and that's competence. So there's an entrepreneurship study that took place. This was, again, that Canadian Mental Health Association study, found that women entrepreneurs reported feeling a greater sense of inadequacy than male entrepreneurs. And we see this competence gap with leadership as well, where women just don't feel the same amount of confidence as men do. We see this coming up over and over as a gender difference in many fields. As women, we tend to overthink things, we tend to multitask, we tend to doubt ourselves, and not feel as competent as men do for whatever reason. So it's really important to give yourself opportunities to feel like you can do something well. And so this need for competence is the need to feel like you can do something well and you can make a contribution using your skills. So try to set yourself up again with realistic expectations that you can meet or even exceed. You know, set the bar a little bit lower perhaps than where you normally would to set yourself up with some success. Try to focus too on what your accomplishments are. Don't focus on your failures, and really keep track of your accomplishments and what you're getting done on a day-to-day basis, so you can look back and see what you've accomplished. So competence is the C in the ABCs. So of those physical needs and your psychological needs, the ABCs, think about what your top unmet need is. You know, take note of that. And how can you satisfy that need today? Can you come up with some creative ways to meet your physical needs and your psychological needs that are unmet right now? So the last part of my presentation, I wanted to talk about promoting your well-being, protecting and promoting it. This idea of filling your cup and replenishing yourself so that you can feel recharged when you return to your work. And so I'm going to talk about recovery. So work recovery is a concept that's been researched quite a lot, not really in entrepreneurship, but in other fields. And it's this idea of mentally switching off from your work. And it's really hard to do for entrepreneurs. They have a lot of difficulty switching off from their work at all. They feel like they've got to maintain this presence and, you know, be really responsive to clients and everything. But recovery is this idea of taking some time to switch off so that you're not responsible for all of that. You know, do something else. And it's really important because we know when we do take time to do this, we have greater well-being as a result without sacrificing our actual engagement at work. So when we return to work, we are more refreshed and we're better able to perform. We tend to do our jobs better, and we tend to be more proactive in our work behaviors where we can think ahead, we can be more creative, we can be more forward thinking. And when we take time to recover in our recovery activities, we can build some really positive resources that can spill back over into your work when you do return back to work. So if you're engaging in mastery experiences after work, you're doing a hobby, you're learning, you're trying something new, then that can build a sense of competence that spills over into your work. Or you can build knowledge, skills, and relationships in your recovery activities that can then spill over into your work. So it's great in a sense that it helps you and your business. So that's kind of my business case for recovery activities. The research shows us that when we take time at night to detach from our work, we are more content and cheerful. We're less fatigued and depleted at bedtime. We feel less tired and irritated the next day, aside from even quality of sleep. And we have more positive emotions at work the next day, which leads to better performance. When we feel positively, we perform better. We're better able to focus. So the research is suggesting, I think, that recovery can really benefit entrepreneurs. So how can you recover? There's 3 key things to focus on in your off time. So one way of recovering is restorative and relaxing activities. And so this is what we might think of typically when we think of self-care, you know, the massages and the hot baths and all that kind of thing. So relaxation is great, and that looks different for different people, right? So you have to know for you what's most relaxing and try to engage in some of those kinds of activities. But another way to recover is through mastery experiences, which means learning a new skill, trying something new, or otherwise challenging yourself in your off time. So that might mean learning a new language, training, engaging in difficult exercise or training. It could be learning a new hobby or some other skill, but something that is different from your work, but where you can learn and challenge yourself and feel accomplished in your off time. So you've got relaxation and mastery, but no matter what you do, it's really important to just psychologically detach from your work. So in that time, your phone's not dinging, you're not responding to texts or emails or phone calls. You really need to detach. And a critical piece of this is to plan for it. So maybe in your email signature, you add in your office hours and a note that you won't be available during these times, and plan ahead for that recovery time, acknowledging that those breaks and those evenings kind of to recover are critical to help you return to work the next day refreshed and rejuvenated and able to perform again. It's refilling up your bucket. So it's important to plan recovery, plan it make it a habit, and not only have daily recovery periods, but we also need those longer periods of recovery, like a weekend off, a long weekend or a vacation off, to interrupt the strain that we could be feeling in our work and to, really top off your bucket. So that's kind of the idea of recovery. And I want to finish off with this idea of positive experiences and emotions and the importance of building those into your day, especially for entrepreneurs in these circumstances who might be thinking you might need to pivot right now or adapt your business model to suit the circumstances. You need to be able to be creative and innovative. And I always like to talk about negative emotions, like you're in a dark room and you're shining a flashlight on the one thing that's really stressing you out. the one major threat that you're facing, you're shining a flashlight on that. When we feel negatively, we tend to really focus on what it is that's stressing us out most. And again, it's like that flashlight. But when we feel positively, it's like we're able to turn the lights on in the room. Now suddenly we can think big picture. We can integrate different pieces of information. We can be more forward thinking and creative. And so this idea, it's called broaden and build theory. It has been supported over and over, where we've induced people to experience different types of emotions and seen the effects of that. And we know from research that when we're feeling positively, we tend to have a broader scope of attention. We tend to pay attention to global details rather than narrow little minute details. We tend to want to try different things and be more creative and more innovative. There's some really interesting work on the importance of positive emotions. And I recognize how difficult it is right now to try to build in positive into your day. I have some tough days myself, and I understand that. But again, it's about thinking of this long term. This might go on for a while. You can't just scrape by day to day for the next several months. Try to build in some positive, some fun, some laughter into your day whenever you can, because it will allow you to be more creative in your business and promote your psychological health. And if we do this, we see that people can get themselves into a positive spiral where we can have positive breeds more positive. And we can actually develop and over time, train ourselves to think more positively over time. So you have to start really intentionally. You have to make a point to find and choose positive over negative whenever you can. So that's playing, that's laughing, that's having fun, doing things you love to do when you get a chance to, and connecting with people you love. And also, like I said, focus on your accomplishments and your strengths rather than your failures and your weaknesses right now. Give yourself lots of grace because you're dealing with a lot on your plate. There's 2 great exercises that you could try to get yourself intentionally focusing on the positive. And one's called the 3 good things exercise. At the end of the day, before you go to bed, you write down 3 good things that happened that day. No matter how tough of a day you've had, there's been 3 good things that happened that you can identify. And it means that you're ending the day on a positive note. And research shows that when people do this, they significantly improve their well-being from doing it. And a similar exercise is gratitude. 3 things that you're grateful for that day. Gratitude is a really powerful way to train your brain to focus on the positive. And so again, it's got to be intentional. You have to choose the positive over the negative, but you can get yourself into this positive spiral, and it becomes easier and easier to focus on the positive over time. So I guess some key takeaways that I have from my talk is to think about what's draining your resources. What can you limit? What can you set boundaries around? And how can you conserve your resources by creating for yourself some realistic expectations for what you're able to accomplish? Let go of that guilt and shame of not meeting your own expectations. And secondly, try to identify and meet your unmet physical and psychological needs, those basic needs, and take time for recovery and for the positive in your life. Try to build that in. It's really not frivolous. And in fact, it will help you to think more creatively and innovatively, which could benefit you and your psychological health, but also your business right now. So it's really important. I've also listed here some mental health resources. Some of you watching may be struggling with mental illness right now. And if you are, there are some resources available now through the federal government. My Wellness Canada is a resource available to all Canadians, and they do have counseling by phone or text, as well as a lot of other self-assessments and mental health courses and other resources you can check out there. And there's another resource below where you can text wellness for a confidential chat session or phone call about your mental health. And different provinces also have their own resources. So at the link up here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the Government of Canada Mental Health Resources website there has a list of provincial resources as well. So you can check out what's available through your provincial government. And for Indigenous peoples, there's the Hope for Wellness Helpline. If you do have access to an employee assistance plan, don't forget that you might have resources through that, although I assume as entrepreneurs you might not have access to that. But that could be available to some. And that's all I have right now, but I welcome any questions or comments that I could try to respond to.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. That was, I feel like these webinars always for me come at the exact moment that I need to hear many of the messages. And, you psychologically, you understand the importance of so many of these things, but especially now, putting that intellectual, that exercise and eating well and all of these great things are really important, but you need to practice what is sort of being preached to you during these challenging times. But I think, you had some really fantastic practical takeaways that I really appreciate you bringing to the table. And as she mentioned, if there's any questions from our panelists, I'll maybe kick one off to get us started before we wrap up for the day. In terms of teams, so obviously, focusing on yourself and you can't pour from an empty cup, and you need to make sure that you are focusing on your mental well-being. How do you recommend, supporting teams within your organizations? Maybe if you have one or two staff that could also be struggling with these challenges, how do you encourage them to, fill their own cups in ways that work for them individually?
Oh, that's a really good question. And that's another stressor entrepreneurs may be facing. If you have employees, you might be really worried about how they're doing through this. So I think that's a really important question. And one is to refer them to any resources that are available to them first of all, to communicate that their mental health is important, that it could be something, and their psychological health, it could be something that everybody's struggling with right now. So have a list of resources available that you can refer people to in case they do need some additional help. Don't take on the role of counselor. Leaders, I know you want to help, but the best way to help is to refer them to professional help rather than take on the burden of trying to do that yourself. Don't try to be a counselor, just refer them to help and there are some resources I provided that you can use. Or if you have a benefits plan that covers mental health services, or if there's an employee assistance plan, then you can refer them to that. But just communicate that it's important that you value everyone's mental health and psychological health, and that you're willing to offer whatever resources you have at your disposal.
That's a really important comment as well, about not taking on that burden yourself, that, you're dealing with your own, the feelings and emotions and carrying the weight of both your organization, but also your employees. And if you're taking on their emotional burden as well, that's not going to be sustainable. So that I really like that piece of feedback as well. We have a chat from Dr. Kim Hendy. Hi, Kim, from Disruptive Arts, who wants to thank you for the presentation. And wanted to add a couple of comments that while, we focus on the what and when, to add the how, I strongly suggest that entrepreneurs incorporate a 1 to 5 mindfulness minutes of the day at the beginning or end of their day, and incorporating mindful breathing as a practice that we can all incorporate. In terms of mindfulness, do you have any other tips specifically for our entrepreneurs, or for those, I think this racing mind and always feeling like we need to be multitasking and doing a million things at once, taking those moments of pause and reflection. Do you have any other tips of how we can take that time even in small chunks of our day?
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment. There's a lot of research on the power of mindfulness to help us retrain our brain to be in the present and not worrying about the future or worrying about the past. So it's a really powerful tool, and it could be part of your sleep hygiene routine to try to wind yourself down at the end of the day. But even 1 minute of mindfulness or a grounding exercise where you focus on something you see, something you hear, something you touch, something you smell, and just spend a minute thinking about that, you know, even if it's just picking up your coffee, feeling the warmth, you know, smelling, and then taking a sip and feeling that in your mouth. And you just really calmly focus on the present. And that's all it's trying to get you to do is get into the present. So mindfulness is a really important strategy to try to calm yourself and to get focused. So I think that's a really great suggestion.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got another question saying, this is very helpful and very timely for me. Thanks, Lisa. When people mention being gentle with yourself, what does that look like with the strategies that you've mentioned? Or is it with other things too? I hear that a lot and have never understood what it looks like in practice. Great comment.
Yeah. And it's this idea of self-care too. Like, what does that really mean? Sometimes I think that's about putting more things on your plate sometimes, when really sometimes getting a productive chunk of work done is self-care. But being gentle with yourself, really what I don't know what the previous webinar presenter really meant by that exactly, but to me it means having realistic expectations of yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself to the point where you're not able to meet any of your own expectations for yourself. Because again, that can lead to shame and guilt that just piles on the stress for yourself. And you're focusing then on unmet expectations that reduce your sense of confidence and accomplishment in your work. So set yourself up with realistic expectations that you're able to meet, you know? And really, that's what I mean by being gentle with yourself.
And I'll add sort of a secondary layer on what we've been hearing from many women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general at the moment. This idea that, you know, we're pivoting and entrepreneurs are going to, you know, create the solutions that solve, you know, all these global problems, and this incredible amount of pressure that entrepreneurs specifically are facing that, you know, we're built to be able to shift our business tomorrow and have a totally different service model delivered. Like just the pressure that is either external or internal can really cloud, you know, what's actually feasible. Like for you to completely change your company within a 24-hour period might not be, you know, available to yourself. So be gentle, exactly as you say, on the expectations. And as we see organizations shift and respond in really quick fashions, you know, being realistic about what you're able to do and how you can shift your business during this challenging time. Because I think that's been adding to a lot of pressure. And in many conversations I've been having with entrepreneurs, you know, I need to pivot faster. I need to be, you know, diversifying in every possible way. That gentle reminder of, you know, I heard a quote yesterday on a podcast that I was listening to, that when we get lost, we run faster. Like you kind of need to just take a moment to assess where you're at so that you can proceed, you know, at a regular pace, potentially a little bit faster, but not running in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it's about kind of taking a minute, just take stock, assess where you are for now, and then work smarter, not harder necessarily, you know.
Agreed. And Kim had another addition here. Also, a mindfulness approach on being gentle means feeling proud and happy for whatever it was that you were able to achieve in the day. If you had a to-do list of 20 things and you only achieved one, be grateful to yourself, appreciate that one thing, and know that is okay. That's wonderful advice, Kim. We actually just had Kim on the Thrive podcast recently talking about a very similar topic. So that's a secondary learning that we can add to this webinar.
Oh, awesome. No, that's a really good point. And it's about not judging yourself. You have so many limitations right now. All of us are facing a lot of stress. If you can only survive that day, it's okay. It is what it is. Pick it up the next day. Be gentle with yourself.
There you go. Yeah. Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. This was, you know, I think very timely for many people in the audience and for myself, you know, personally, definitely looking at restorative environments. That is something that I'm going to do as my action item. And that psychological detachment, easier said than done in many ways, but trying to work towards that as being a goal to really rest, to find those moments that you can, you know, separate and not just see yourself so blended with your work that your value value is not the work that you can produce. And decoupling that, especially during this time, is a challenge, but something that I think as women and women entrepreneurs specifically, that we can focus on to get ourselves through the next couple of months.
Very good point. And I need these messages all myself as well.
Yeah.
So
there we go.
perfectly. Yeah.
Good reminders.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us for another Women Entrepreneur webinar series. As I mentioned, all of these are recorded and available on our Women Entrepreneur program website, on Startup Canada's website. We really hope that you receive some valuable insights on the importance of health and well-being, and symbolically making yourself available and listening to this type of feedback, I think, is also a great first step. So we will be continuing to provide specifically women entrepreneurs with resources over the coming weeks and months as things with COVID-19 evolve, and as women continue to start and scale their businesses, that we need to be providing support across the board to women entrepreneurs, because this is an incredibly important part of both of our economy, and making sure that we have representation within the small business community. So thank you again, everyone, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.